Welcome back to Money Matters. The government collects billions of dollars from energy companies annually. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative has been monitoring over the past 6 years the money that is supposed to be collected by the government from energy companies is actually collected.
On set this evening to talk on this matter is Victor Hart, who is the chairman of the steering committee of the EITI. Mr. Hart, good evening to you.
Thank you very much.
Tell our audience about EITI, what it does, and what is its importance in the scheme of things.
Well, thanks very much for having me on your program. The EITI, or the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, is an international coalition of the stakeholders involved in the exploitation of natural resources in countries across the world. And those stakeholders are the government, who are the managers of the resources, the companies that do the extraction, and civil society, who represent the people, the owners of the natural resources. Billions of dollars that Judy referred to as, our monitoring over the last 6 years represents, in fact, the people's patrimony and our children's inheritance. So the EITI is about protecting that, protecting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, so that the state would be seen to be collecting the correct amounts of revenue so that they could provide the country and the people with the necessary services.
As it stands now, it's voluntary for companies to
Yes.
to volunteer and say, okay, we paid X amount to the government, and this is how much, and government will then see how much they actually collected. But there are some companies that do not volunteer. Are you seeing a lot of companies that are not willing to give up their information as to how much money they pay to the government?
No, fortunately, the number of companies that have declined to participate in the EITI is very small. The big companies, the multinationals, are implementing the EITI in other jurisdictions, so they have no problem in being part of the Trinidad and Tobago EITI implementation process. But we have found that some of our smaller, locally owned, privately owned companies in Trinidad and Tobago have been reluctant to come on board. And we are not sure why, because being a voluntary initiative, a company doesn't have to say why I don't want to be on board. We set a threshold of 20 million TT dollars in revenue payments to the country, to the government, so that any company that meets that threshold is approached to participate in the EITI process. But we have not had 100% response. But there is hope that if we get EITI legislation next year, that it could make participation mandatory.
Quarrying is an extractive industry.
Yes.
Does it fall under the EITI?
Yes, the extractive sector refers to oil, gas, and mining. Mining in the context of Trinidad and Tobago means quarries and asphalt. Mm-hmm. The quarry sector is very unregulated, as we all know, and there's also a feeling that there's a lot of illegal quarrying taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. We expect that the quarry companies are going to be more reluctant to join the EITI reporting process because some of them operate in very secretive ways. In our current EITI report that we published at the end of September, for the first time, we are reporting on some quarries that voluntarily agreed to a pilot study. And we have done this dry run, as it were, so that we could identify any problems and therefore use the pilot project as an example to other quarry companies to come on board for next year's report.
Any sort of projections or estimates as to how much money might be slipping through the cracks if you look at quarrying? If it's not regulated, so we don't know what they're paying, what they're not paying. Any figures as to what we should be collecting? We
have a figure of $1 billion reported for the fiscal year 2014-15. But we have done some in-house projections and see that as just a drop in the bucket, maybe 10% of what should be done. So we really are very keen on building capacity among the quarries companies so that their accounting and management standards would be brought up to a level that they could meaningfully participate in the EITI process as we go forward.
So what you're saying is that there are businessmen in this country who are allowed to dig and extract the country's resources, but not pay any taxes on it.
Well, that is in fact what is happening, because there are probably no more than 8 quarries that are operating today with a license. There are many, many more who are waiting in the queue for licenses, and there are many, many, many more who are not even in the queue for licenses. So there needs to be proper regulation by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to issue licenses promptly.
Mr. Hart, thank you very much for joining us on set. I know it's a very short time, but we will continue this conversation on another episode of Money Matters. When we come back, we talk to a former ArcelorMittal worker who tells us how her life has changed since the steel plant closed its doors.